With 1,803 newspaper articles, The Liberator, written by William Lloyd Garrison, was one of the most influential anti-slavery pieces in history. Garrison would also help President Abraham Lincoln to make his slavery-ending decision. The Liberator helped form a group of abolitionists with the help of a former slave, Frederick Douglass. Abolitionists are a group that want to completely end slavery. The women of the South didn't have the biggest influence. Seeing as the men owned all the slaves, nothing they could do could really change them. But Angelina Grimke thought that they could. She tried to persuade the women of the South to persuade their husbands to end the slavery. Slavery, as well as slave trade, began way before William Lloyd Garrison's The Liberator was even published. Slave labor started in the hearts of white men and grew into something that the U.S. looked at as a permanent thing. For years, nothing could persuade the Southerners to give up their slaves. Slavery was worth more than almost anything. The only thing worth more than the slaves was the land itself. To speak out against slavery was almost unheard of. Until one day, Garrison decided to speak out against slavery. Garrison grew up with a strong belief in God. He started his paper not only because he found slavery awful, but also because he thought God had sent him to completely abolish slavery. On January 1st, 1831, William Lloyd Garrison started a newspaper describing what he saw in slavery, something horrible. He begins a group of abolitionists that become more and more popular over time, with a former slave, Frederick Douglass, that has a way with words and first-hand accounts, and a former slave owner, Angelina Grimke, that defies what it means to be a Southern woman. He has quite a team. Over the years, this group inspires so many people, including Harriet Beecher Stowe, who writes a novel on March 20th about the life of a slave in the South. Uncle Tom's Cabin, which Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote, touched hearts instead of striking fear. After her son died of a plague, she was inspired to write this novel. The abolitionists went to many towns all over the U.S., speaking to people both in the North and the South about the harshness of slavery. Some were persuaded to help, some were not. The slave owners were the hardest to persuade. Frederick Douglass realized he wanted to join the cause when he fought back against a slave breaker, someone who would come and beat him for no reason. He finally had enough and fought back, and not only ruined the breaker's reputation, but what he later wrote made him a man. Douglass went to a convention where Garrison spoke, and from that moment he knew that he needed to help Garrison. He not only loved Garrison's Liberator and his words, but he loved Garrison himself. Prior to the Fugitive Slave Act, the abolitionists had started to think things were going their way. Garrison had even thought the same thing. But then it hit. It hit like a hurricane, and all the abolitionists did seemed to be for nothing, and it had looked as it had almost never happened. Garrison's newspaper started the long and harsh bickering between the North and the South that turned into a civil war until one New Year's Eve when it would all come to an end. This event caused change because by having so many people be a part of this cause, it had a bigger outcome. It also changed the hearts of the way people felt about slavery. Many people started to believe that slavery was wrong. This pro-slavery, anti-slavery debate started with the newspaper and grew into a civil war. Over time, Southerners grew more protective of their plantations. Northerners became more determined to end slavery. This determination between both the North and South would start a war that would end a huge part of the United States history. The Liberator led to the Civil War, which ended slavery. Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation that ended slavery. Garrison even had a say or encouraged Lincoln to sign the Emancipation Proclamation and helped him decide to end slavery.